Yes, another phone call between US President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, essentially more of the same, although he did mention the C word, ceasefire. Let me just read you out the salient points. Essentially, he said he welcomed efforts to address violence, especially intercommunal violence within Israel's border. He encouraged Israel to protect civilians. As we know, the death toll has been extremely one-sided, with far more children and women dying in Gaza, and also support for a ceasefire, and will keep in touch. It sort of echoes an earlier call between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his Israeli counterpart, in which they talked about negotiating, but really, essentially, the Biden phone call and the Secretary of State essentially asking for updates on how the operation, Israeli operation, is going against Hamas, essentially allowing Israel to continue. This, of course, follows a deadlock at the UN Security Council once again, the US blocking even a statement from the Council. We understand that it did not point the finger squarely at Hamas. They did not want that. There was also, of course, talk of a two-state solution and the borders of 1967 for Palestine and Israel living side by side. These are two issues. While the US administration still clings to a two-state solution, we know that that is not the policy of the current government in Israel of Benjamin Netanyahu. Also, the US is the main weapons supplier, as we know, to Israel, and green-lighted fast about $750 million in upscale weapons, including missiles. That has been noted around the world and criticized by quite a few countries. China, of course, which holds the rotating presidency of the Security Council this month, did release what it could be a statement, and was agreed to by other powers, which essentially asked the US to step up and stop blocking things at the United Nations. Remember, the US government has said that human rights would be a centerpiece of its foreign policy, and it's getting more and more criticism from around the world. Now, on the word of ceasefire, we know that the US has an emissary in the region, but negotiating essentially in Ramallah, where the Palestinian Authority are, not with Hamas, because they consider it a terrorist organization. The European Union are involved, France is involved, Egypt. They did have connections to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is, of course, Hamas is an offshoot, but it's a different government now. We also have the United Arab Emirates, Qataris involved, but it does seem that a ceasefire is a long way off. And if we look at previous wars between Israel and Gaza and Hamas and Gaza, they have gone on a long time with mounting casualties. But this time, I can tell you, within the Democratic Party, within Washington, with the American public, there is a very different feeling. That the Palestinians here are definitely suffering far more than the Israelis, and there is more and more pressure here in the US for something to happen to stop the violence. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.